Limes was a border defense, a delimiting system of ancient Rome. It marked the boundaries and provinces of the Roman Empire. The Latin noun limes had a number of different meanings: a path, a balk, delimiting fields, a boundary line, a marker, any road, a path, any channel, such as a stream channel, or any distinction, a difference. The word limes was utilized by Latin writers to denote a marked or fortified frontier. This sense has been adapted and extended by modern historians concerned with the frontiers of the Roman Empire. E.g., Hadrian's Wall in the north of England is sometimes styled the Limes Britannicus. The frontier of the Roman province of Arabia facing the desert is called the Limes Arabicus, and so forth. This was the traditional definition and usage of the term. It is now more common to accept that limes was not a term used by the Romans for the imperial frontier, fortified or not. This is a modern, anachronistic interpretation. The term became common after the 3rd century AD, when it denoted a military district under the command of a dux limitus. Some experts suggested that the limes may actually have been called Monumentum Traiani, Trajan's bulwark, referring to a passage by Ammianus Marcellinus according to which Emperor Julian had reoccupied this fortification in 360 AD. Some limits. The limits represented the borderline of the Roman Empire at its greatest extent in the 2nd century AD. It stretched over 5,000 kilometers from the Atlantic coast of northern Britain, through Europe to the Black Sea, and from there to the Red Sea and across North Africa to the Atlantic coast. The remains of the limits today consist of vestiges of walls, ditches, forts, fortress and civilian settlements. Certain elements of the line have been excavated, some reconstructed, and a few destroyed. The two sections of the limes in Germany cover a length of 550 kilometers from the northwest of the country to the Danube in the southeast. The 118 kilometers long Hadrian's Wall was built on the orders of the Emperor Hadrian c. AD 122 at the northernmost limits of the Roman province of Britannia. It is a striking example of the organization of a military zone and illustrates the defensive techniques and geopolitical strategies of ancient Rome. The Antonine Wall, a 60 kilometers long fortification in Scotland, was started by Emperor Antoninus Pius in AD 142 as a defense against the barbarians of the north. It constitutes the northwesternmost portion of the Roman limes. The most notable examples of Roman limits are Hadrian's Wall, Limes Britannicus; Antonine Wall in Scotland; Saxon Shore, late Roman limes in southeast England; Limes Germanicus with the Upper Germanic and Ambretian limes; Limes Arabicus, the frontier of the Roman province of Arabia Petraea facing the desert; Limes Tripolitanus, the frontier in modern Libya facing the Sahara; Limes Alutarinus, the eastern border of the Roman province of Dacia; Limes Transalutarinus, the frontier in the lower Danube; Limes Mosii, the frontier of the Roman province Moesia, from Sigurjunem, Serbia along the Danube to Moldavia; Limes Norici, the frontier of the Roman province Noricum, from the river Inn along the Danube to Cannabratsa in Austria; Limes Pannonicus, the frontier of the Roman province Pannonia, along the Danube from Klosterneuburg, Austria to Tarunem in Serbia. A medieval limes is the Limes Saxoniae in Holstein. Etymology and sentiment. The stem of limes, limit, which can be seen in the genitive case, limitus, marks it as the ancestor of an entire group of important words in many languages, for example, English limit. Modern languages have multiplied its abstract formulations. For example, from limit comes the abbreviation lim, used in mathematics to designate the limit of a sequence or a function. See limit. In metaphysics, material objects are limited by matter and therefore are delimited from each other. In ethics, men must know the limitations and are wise if they do. An etymology was given in some detail by Julius Pokorny in Dogger Manish's Etymologisches Wörterbuch. According to him, it comes from Indo-European li, to bend, elbow. The Latin meaning was discussed in detail by W. Gibbet. The sense is that a limit bends across one in some way. The limes was a cross path or a cross wall, which the Romans meant to throw across the path of invaders to hinder them. It is a defensive strategy. The Romans never built limits where they considered themselves free to attack, as the emperor had ordered the army to stay within the limits except for punitive expeditions. They were as much a mental barrier as material. The groups of Germanic warriors harrying the limes during summer used the concept to full advantage, knowing that they could concentrate and supply themselves outside the limes without fear of preemptive strikes. In a few cases, they were wrong. The limit concept engendered a sentiment among the soldiers that they were being provoked by the Germanic raiders and were held back from just retaliation by a weak and incompetent administration. They were being sold out. So they mutinied. The best remedy for a mutiny was an expedition across the limes. Toward the later empire, the soldiers assassinated emperors who preferred diplomacy and put their own most popular officers into the vacant office. Roman writers and subsequent authors who depended on them presented the limes as some sort of sacred border beyond which human beings did not transgress, and if they did, it was evidence that they had passed the bounds of reason and civilization. To cross the border was the mark of a savage. They wrote of the Alemanni disrespecting it as though they had passed the final limitation of character and had committed themselves to perdition. The Alemanni, on the other hand, never regarded the border as legitimate in the first place. The Romans were foreigners changing native place names and intruding on native homes and families, only to be tolerated at all because they were willing to pay cash for the privilege and offered the blandishments of civilized life. According to Pokorny, Latin limen, threshold, is related to limes being the stone over which one enters or leaves the house, and some have gone so far as to view the frontier as a threshold. The Merriam-Webster dictionaries take this view, as does J. B. Hoffman in Etymologisches Wörterbuch des Griechischen under limen. The White Latin Dictionary denies any connection, deriving limen from *ligmen, as in lien from *lig, tie. The threshold ties together the doorway. The American Heritage Dictionary refuses to go further than Latin limes. The limes in Europe, Britain and Gaul. This section of limes existed from the 1st to the 5th century AD and ran through the provinces of Britannia Inferior, Britannia Superior. The limes in Britain is on the territory of the present-day United Kingdom in England, Scotland and Wales. Initially, the Gascrige and the Staingate, with their chains of Roman camps and watchtowers, marked the northern boundary of Britannia from the 1st to the 2nd century. Later the isthmuses in the north between the Firth of Forth and Firth of Clyde were guarded by the defences of the Antonine Wall and the line between the mouth of the Tyne and Solway Firth by Hadrian's Wall. The perimeter defence of Hadrian's Wall was achieved through the construction of camps on the lowlands, which were built along the most important roads in the north. Security and monitoring on the coasts in the west and southeast was achieved by camps and by chains of watchtowers or signal towers both along the coastline and along main roads in the interior. The occupying forces, Exercitus Britannicus, consisted mostly of cohorts of auxilia. The strategic reserve comprised 3 legions based in Eburicum, York, Piscatilium and Dover. The observation and surveillance of the waters around the British Isles was the responsibility of the Classis Britannica, whose headquarters was in Rutupii, Richborough. Legions, auxiliary cohorts and the fleet were commanded by the provincial governors. For the 3rd century, units of comitatenses, Limitani and Liburnaria came under the command of 2 generals, Comes Britanniarum, Dux Britanniarum. Saxon Shore. This section of the limes existed from the 3rd to 5th centuries AD and covered the provinces of Britannia Inferior, Belgica, Lugdunensis, Aquitania. This limes of the late antiquity ran through the territory of the present-day United Kingdom and France. In the 3rd century, on the British side of the English Channel between the estuaries of the Wash and the Solent, a separate military district, the Litis Saxonicum, was established to repel Saxon pirates and plunderers. The Gallic side of the English Channel and Atlantic coast were included therein. Monitoring and coastal surveillance were carried out by a chain of watchtowers or signal towers, camps and fortified ports. Most of the Saxon shore camps probably served as naval bases. The garrisons of the camps were composed of infantry and several cavalry regiments. Monitoring and surveillance of the Channel were the responsibility of the Classis Britannica and Classis Sambrica, whose headquarters were in Locus Quartensis, Port de Tapal, guarding the mouth of the Somme. The units of comitatenses, Limitani and Liburnaria in this area came under the command of 3 generals. Comes Littrus Saxoni Cheaper Britannium, Count of the Saxon Shore, Dux Belgici Secundae, Dux Tractus Americani et Nervicani, Lower Germania. This section of limes existed from the 1st to the 5th century AD and ran through the province of Lower Germania. It lies on the territory of today's Netherlands and Germany. This limes was a river border on the Rhine, defended by a chain of camps that ran from the North Sea to Vinkstbach and Bonner. There were only a few camps in the second, middle section between Bonner and Alpia Novi Omega Spatavoran there were considerably more. Here there were also larger legion camps and, with one exception, they were all cavalry barracks. The landscape of the 3rd section between Alpia Novi Omega Spatavorum and Mare Germanicum was characterized by numerous small streams and boggy marshland. Consequently, in this area there was only one cavalry camp. Border security here consisted mainly of tightly packed, relatively small cohort forts. The occupying troops, Exercitus Germaniae Inferioris, consisted mostly of auxiliary cohorts. From the 2nd century, the strategic reserve comprised 3 legions stationed in Bonner, Novisium, Neuss, Vetra, Xantin and Noviomegas, Nijmegen. The control and surveillance of the waters of the North Sea, the Rhine estuary and the Lower Rhine was the responsibility of the Classis Germanica, whose headquarters was in Colonia Claudia Ara, Agrippinensium, Cologne. Legions, auxiliary and fleet units were commanded by the respective provincial governor. From the 3rd century the Ripenses, Comitatenses and Liburnaria were under the command of the Dux Belgici Secundae. Upper Germania and Rhaetia. This limes existed from the 1st to 5th centuries AD and guarded the provinces of Germania Superior, Rhaetia. It lay on the territory of the present German states of Rhineland-Palatinate, Hesse, Baden-Württemberg and Bavaria, and bordering to the north those parts of the Roman province of Rhaetia that lay north of the Danube and guarding the eastern border of that part of Germania Superior that lay east of the Rhine. In Upper Germania the border defences initially consisted only of a post road. From about 162–63 AD it was turned into a defensive barrier with watchtowers and signal towers, palisades, ditches and earthworks, whilst on one short section of the Rhaetian limes, a solid stone wall was even erected. In its final stages the Upper Germanic Rhaetian limes was about 550 kilometers long and ran from Rheinbrühl in the county of Neuwied in northern Rhineland-Palatinate, as far as Heidenheim on the Danube. Between the villages of Osterberken and Welzheim the limes ran for 81 kilometers almost in a straight line southwards. In the literature, this unusual section is taken as further evidence that this type of boundary wall had never been used for defensive purposes. The land of agridecomates that was guarded by this limes had to be vacated by the Romans in 260–285 AD, however, and they moved the bases back to the banks of the Rhine and Danube, which were much easier to defend militarily. The exact route of the limes along the border between Upper Germania and Rhaetia has not been fully explored. In the late 4th and early 5th centuries, the Rhaetian limes was reorganized and divided into 3 sections. The northern border of Rhaetia formed the Pars Superior. The western border was the Pars Media with the fortified town of Cambo-Dunim and bases from Vermania to Casilicum. The Pars Inferior was the section between Regensburg and Passau. The occupying troops, Exercitus Germaniae Superioris and Exercitus Raraticus, consisted mostly of auxiliary cohorts. From the 2nd century, the strategic reserve was formed from 3 legions stationed in Mogontiacum, Mainz, Argentorat, Strasbourg and Castra Regina, Regensburg. The monitoring of the Upper Rhine was the responsibility of the Classis Germanica. That of the Rhaetic Danube came under the Classis Pannonia, whose headquarters was in Aquincum, Budapest. Legions and auxiliary cohorts were under the command of the governor. From the 3rd century, the Upper Germanic Rhaetian border troops were commanded by 3 generals: Dux Rhaetiae, Dux Mogontiacensis, Comes Tractagentoratensis, Danubilla Rhine limes. This limes existed from the 3rd to the 5th centuries AD and guarded the provinces of Germania Superior, Rhaetia. It lies on the territory of present-day Germany, Austria, Switzerland and Liechtenstein. As early as the period 15 BC to about 70 AD, the border between Rome and Germania largely ran along the line of the late antique Danubilla Rhine limes before the Romans advanced further north into the agridecomates. Because of troop withdrawals and massive barbarian invasions, the Upper Germanic Rhaetian limes had been abandoned in the late 3rd century and the border fell back to the banks of the 3 rivers, especially around the year 300. The Emperor Diocletian had new fortifications built directly on the river banks or on major roads in the hinterlandia. Around 370 AD, the line of fortifications was considerably strengthened under the Emperor Valentinian I to counter the Alemanni, who were steadily advancing southwards. By contrast with the Upper Germanic Rhaetian limes, the DIRL primarily fulfilled defensive purposes. Its camps had much stronger and higher walls than the high imperial predecessors. Furthermore, they had in most cases been built to conform to the local topography. This meant that they could not be built in the classical pack-of-cards shape. Between them ran a dense chain of watchtowers and signal towers provided an additional security measure. On the large lakes in this region flotillas of patrol boats were stationed. Lake Constance, numerous barcariorum. Lake Neuchâtel, Classis barcariorum. Comitatenses, Ripenses and Liburnaria in this section of the limes were under the command of 4 generals: Dux Rhaetiae, Dux Provincia Sequana Comes Tractagentoratensis, Dux Germaniae Prime, Noricum. This section of the limes existed from the 1st to the 5th century AD and guarded part of the Roman province of Noricum. It is on the soil of the present-day Austrian states of Upper and Lower Austria. It ran always along the Danube, from Passau, Boydrum to Zeiselmauer, Canabrazzo. This is also a reaper, which was guarded by a loose chain of cohort forts. The main road on the Norican limes was the Via Uxta Amnum Danuvium. The initially simple wooden earth structures were systematically converted under Emperor Hadrian into stone encampments and, during the 4th century, brought once more up to date and massively reinforced. Between the camps, in strategic places at good points of observation, were watchtowers or signal towers, and, in the late antiquity, burgi. In the middle section, between the camps of Favianes and Melk, watchtowers only occurred sporadically. Here, the narrow valley of the Wachau, with its densely forested escarpments, made access to the river bank more difficult. Every camp had its own river port, a landing stage and a storage area, because the Danube was not only border zone, but also the most important transport and trade route in the region. Over time, civilian settlements of Vichy were established immediately next to the camps and, in the immediate hinterland of the limes, walled towns a municipia were founded, for example, Ilium Sicium or Overlava. They were the administrative or commercial centers of the region. In late antiquity, the Norican area was divided into two parts. It is probable that a second defensive line was created to the rear. The occupying troops, Exercitus Noricus, consisted mostly of auxiliary cohorts, and a legion stationed in Lauriacum. ENNs acted as the strategic reserve. The surveillance and security of the Danube and its tributaries were the responsibility of the classis Pannonia. Units of the legions, naval and auxiliary forces were commanded by the respective governors. In late antiquity, according to Notitia Dignitatum, 4 newly established flotillas undertook this task. For the 3rd century, the Norian comitatenses, Ripenses and Libernari were under the command of 2 generals, Comes Illyrici, Dux Pannoniae Primae Norici Ripensis. Italy. The Claustrum Alpium Iliarum, a defensive rampart over 80 kilometers long, protected the heartland of the Roman Empire. This was located in the provinces of Noricum Mediterraneum, Dalmatia, Venetia and Histrinca. The Claustrum Alpium Iliarum lay on the present-day territories of Austria, Slovenia, Croatia and Italy. It was a system of ramparts, camps, watchtowers and burgi in the Julian Alps that was to protect the mountain passes into Italy, especially the Via Gemina, from invaders. The first fieldworks and signal towers were built in the 1st century AD, when barbarian attacks on the Roman Empire intensified during the 3rd century. The defensive barrier was massively expanded and strengthened in the late 3rd and early 4th centuries under the reigns of the Emperor Diocletian and Constantine the Great. The heart of this defensive system was the Castella ad Pyrum in the Birnbaum forest, which guarded the pass crossing to Italy. It had a permanent garrison of 100 to 500 men. Also part of the claustra were the military stations of Nauportis and Castrina on both sides of the Birnbaum Pass. The claustra continued in use up to the 5th century. The occupying troops in the late antiquity were part of the military district of Tractis Italiae circa Alps and under the command of the Comes Italia. Pannonia. This stretch of limes was in use from the 1st to the 5th centuries AD and helped to guard the provinces of Pannonia Inferior. Pannonia. The Pannonian limes is situated on the territory of present-day Austria, Slovakia and Hungary. Although this section of the frontier was relatively well protected by the Danube River border Ripa, the Roman military presence here was always exceptionally strong because, especially after the abandonment of Roman Dacia in the late 3rd century, the pressure of migrant peoples from the east on this section of the limes intensified. The tributaries emptying into the Danube offered cheap transport routes, but also made good approach routes for invaders and raiders. The military camps were therefore built by the most important fords, confluences and road termini. The legion and auxiliary camps were mainly located in the immediate vicinity of the river bank. The initial wood and earth structures were systematically converted under Emperor Hadrian into stone barracks and, in the the 4th century, redesigned and massively strengthened in order to match new strategic requirements. The gaps between the camps were closed by a chain of watchtowers or signal towers. In late Roman times, huge inland camps were built and towns in the hinterland were fortified to create a second line of defense. In addition, at vulnerable points, units of the Danube fleet were stationed. In the time of Emperor Marcus Aurelius, the first mention is made in Pannonia of stone watchtowers. In late antiquity, the Pannonian military district was divided into two parts. Advanced defenses were provided by bridgehead camps and military stations on main transport routes in the Barbaricum. The Limes in fiction. The novel series Roman.It is set at the Limes Germanicus in the decades until the first assault of Germanic peoples in 161 AD.